Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we have a very interesting discussion that will point out more in relation to the principles upon which this proposal as the Living Income Guaranteed is founded upon. And we will be certainly talking more about how we have come to this conclusion of, providing basic living human rights, through providing money to people, through providing better wages and so forth. But then it comes to a usual obstacle that we tend to look at as the government, as politics. We've talked about politics before, but today we specifically want to focus on the concept of government. What does it imply, and why are there so many reactions, blame, and conflict when we talk about how we should proceed as a society? So for that, we are going to be discussing with Anna Brix, who has actually taken on this point in her personal vlogs, which we will be placing in the information section of this video as well. Hi, Anna from Sweden.
Hi, everyone.
Cool. Thanks for being here and for your time here. So let's begin. We tend to, ourselves as part of the society and the new community in cyberspace, investigating in alternative media, various resources, documentaries, and so forth. You and I have been talking about this quite a lot in terms of how we tend to look at the problem that is always funneled down to governments, to those that are in control of everything. So here I'd like to propose that we start questioning the words themselves, what they mean, and how we have come to accept them as such. So looking at the word government, what does it mean, and why are there so many reactions toward it?
Yeah, so I'd like to start by saying that I've found that there are especially three distinct stances that people take on when it comes to how they see governments. So either it will be this very placated, passive stance of, like, what do I know? They're the ones in control, where people kind of step out of the entire political discussion, maybe go and vote. And then another stance would be the people who are predominantly for the current political system. And one of the arguments that will often come up in political discussions will be, well, if you don't like it, why don't you vote for someone else? And then the third stance, which is a bit also what we're going to be discussing in this Hangout today, is the antagonistic, anti-government stance of a lot of, especially in the new alternative media, a lot of people are directly opposed to any form of government and believe that government is in essence the major problem that we're facing in this system, that as soon as a government of any sorts is formed, it will immediately go in and impose itself on people's individual rights. So what I then did, because I was seeing this and I was seeing these discussions, like, they don't go anywhere, they just continue. So I went and I investigated the word government itself, and also looked at my own, like the history of in my own life of how I have related to governments. And I discovered that the word government actually comes from the Latin and Greek roots, the prefix and the suffix. The prefix, the beginning of the word govern, comes from the word gubernere, which actually means to steer. And then the word ment, the suffix of the word, actually means mind. So what a lot of people besides us have, the conclusion that they've come to is an understanding that government in essence means mind control, steering the mind. So that anyone who is in government, whenever a government is formed, it will deliberately go in and try and control the individual minds of people. So that's like, also what then explains the entire history of humanity and a lot of the wars and the conflicts that has been on this planet, that it basically comes down to a few or a group of people going in and taking power over the population or the individual.
Yes, and also we can here kind of focus on that aspect, which is more of the construct, the idea of being governed, being directed, being ruled by this minority, and how, in studying history, you realize, okay, this is coming from the Egyptian times and how it has become simply the same bloodlines, families, and so forth that create the government. Okay, so we get that picture, but what I also see is that the problem also is created when we only stick to that notion of, oh, well, yes, it's the rich people, the oligarchs that have all the power. We cannot do anything about it. What happens here with this disempowerment that resides within this word itself? What are we creating within it?
Well, we're abdicating responsibilities. It's very obvious. And in a way, it's also understandable. I mean, I speak to very few people in my world or on the internet that still believes that there is such a thing as actual politics where actual, real, effective decisions are made on behalf of our lives. I mean, most people now know and understand that no substantial change comes from current politics. And then what people do, what I've also resorted to do, is that I'm just not going to vote. Like, why would I want to participate in that system? And then not voting and not participating becomes a form of activism where we believe that, okay, but at least I'm doing something, at least I'm showing that I'm not going to participate in that. But unfortunately, this is the system, this is the way that our world system currently operates. It is the legitimate way to change things. It is through politics. However corrupted, however inefficient it is, that is what we have collectively or globally agreed on, that change has to happen through political decisions. And so when we step out of that and when we become passive and placated, or when we become antagonistic against it, we actually just, we step out of our ability to actually make a difference. And then what I would also say is important, like I said before, this is not to say then that, oh, but you can just go and vote if you have a problem with it, because that's absolute bullshit. That's not the solution. We understand that there is no such thing as real substantial politics today. But that does not mean that politics in itself, that political organization isn't relevant, or that we don't have to stand accountable for it.
I mean, this is something that we tend to miss when we get into these political discussions, wherein we have to realize that government is part of our creation. It is part of the social construct that either directly or indirectly we continue to accept, the same way that we continue to accept money. And how I see it is also that when we come to just wanting to deny government or step out of the system or antagonize the government as a construct, we in that are not really taking responsibility for that creation. And as it exists right now, how I see it is that it's also rather easy to, for example, say, I'm going and to live in a self-sufficient community. I don't have to take anything of my relationship to the government there. I can barter, I can live in a community and be fine there. But then where is like that social responsibility? I mean, the construct in itself exists within our minds. So that is where I would first begin questioning it. Like, where, if I've allowed myself to be directed or controlled or steered by these rules, ideas of myself having to, for example, only having the option to vote for this or that individual, why have I accepted such limited ability to decide, or the ability to choose what is best for myself through this very narrow and very controlled system, because it is controlled, of course. But why not, instead of going outside, wanting to leave the system, wanting to antagonize it, and spend my energy on doing that, why not rather focusing on the solutions? What's your perspective on this?
This is a really cool point. And I would say, first of all, the thing is that yes, you can go out. I've actually tried going out of the system. And in a way, it's kind of the easy way out if you're able to do it. Obviously, it is only the most privileged of us who are able to kind of pretend that we can step out of the system and go and live in a forest or whatever. But the thing is that even when you're doing that, you're not outside. You are not free from the system, because it will in some way or another affect you. Like for example, today I was listening to an interview about the Fukushima radiation problems that are continuing to affect the Japanese people. And one of the things that were said, this is just an example, is that products that are manufactured in Japan are actually being exported, for example, to the United States, where there may be a high level of radiation, but because the United States have lower standards, they will accept these products, and so what I mean to say is that you will be affected in the water supply, in the food you eat, in the environment. It's not possible to step completely out, because sooner or later the consequences of what is happening on this planet will affect you directly or indirectly. And then the other thing that you were saying with this point in relation to government being mind control is that if, as you were saying, if mind control is the problem, then why aren't we focusing more on that? Why aren't we focusing more on how is it possible that my mind can be controlled by someone else? And then what I then see is that people then sort of take this stance of saying, okay, but I've now realized this, so I'm now going to be in control of my own mind. But what we don't realize is how extensively saturated this mind control is into our culture, into our social systems, into our relationships. I mean, even our intimate relationships. This is not only from the government, the people in political control. This is also from forms of corporate governments. So, and that mind control is functioning on a collective level. Like, for you to individually step out of that, you are going to have to address the fact that it's something that's happening to all of us, because you're going to be interacting with other people, you're going to be in relationships with other people, you're going to have to buy products and eat and so forth. So I would say that that's actually a very important place to start, which also brings us to an interesting development, or we could say a complete change of perspective, which is that if we then start steering our own minds, then who is the government? Because if government means to steer the mind, then I suddenly become a governing force in my own life. And now I'm speaking about also educating myself and so forth. So that could be quite interesting to continue to discuss.
Yeah, let's get to that point of where we have lost ourselves. We tend to get lost, and maybe even in these communities, like cyber communities, where there's a lot of discussion on, well, what system then can we implement if we don't like the government, if we don't like capitalism and so forth, wherein there's a lot of deviation into semantics, ideologies, factions, anarchism, libertarianism, and so forth. But where have we actually left like living principles? I don't see like any other place wherein maybe a few people that do consider this aspect of principles come first, rather than like getting married to a particular ideology, faction, some historical character from which to take the ideology for a new government and so forth. So what's your perspective on this, and why is it required actually to focus on principles or practical principles?
Okay, so something that I see is that we've come to take for granted, that throughout the history of human development, we have developed these different ideologies and political systems and philosophies. And we just accept that there are these, maybe the at the root of them, maybe there are 10 or 20, like the basic fundamental principle thoughts, and we think that we can never move beyond that. Like, there isn't even a concept that it would be possible to create something completely different. So then what we do is that we fight with each other of which one is the best one. And that, I mean, our entire our entire political system is built up on that. It's in a way it's a mockery, but we then have these representatives that are fighting over ideologies, and then we as people see who we agree with, but we never consider that it could be possible to create a form of organization amongst ourselves and each other, of managing our lives and this planet in a way that would be sustainable and that would be supportive for everyone, that could step beyond these ideologies. So that's one of the problems that I see, is that we have kind of gotten stuck in these semantics and in these ideologies, not realizing that it's about practicality. It's about this real world, this real planet that is a planet where there are 7 billion people on it, and there are animals and there are plant life, and there's an ecosystem that has to be maintained for everyone to live and thrive. And that's the bottom line. That is where we should start. And there's nothing like politically ideology, a political ideology about that. It is, a fact. And so that is where we should start, which would be to start living principled, to start, for example, understanding that for I as an individual to thrive effectively, the entire ecosystem of the planet also has to thrive. Therefore, that would be a principle to implement as a platform in politics. Okay, so we see that it's complete logic and common sense that the planet has to thrive for us as individuals to thrive. All right, what politics can we then formulate based on that principle? You see, so it's like a completely different, very simplistic perspective, rather than these like super philosophical ideologies about the good in man and the right of the individual, and all these concepts that in essence doesn't really have much to do with our actual physical, practical life here on this planet.
Yeah, that's where I see that ideologies become even one more obstacle for us to come to agree, to get to a common ground, which is why we so much focus on principles. And we can talk with various people that might agree with, for example, the fact of supporting the current capitalist system, or completely getting rid of the government as anarchism and so forth. But those aspects tend to create more diatribes and debates that lead kind of nowhere, where we don't come to agree, instead of realizing that at the moment, I mean, there's people starving, homeless, jobless, and we are continuing to discuss like what would be most ideal. That's kind of losing the whole context of this, why we're focusing on human basic principles as rights, why we're focusing on providing money so that you have access to water, food, shelter, education, the very basics, so that once that we have that, then we can create further platforms to first educate ourselves on why have we come to exist in this manner, this system, how it has come to be configured this way, where we have abdicated our responsibility. So from that point, then sure, I mean, there's technology that can create these peer-to-peer discussions and open source. There's a lot of development on that. There's liquid democracy, but how can we come to vote or to get to an agreement if we cannot focus on like common grounds? Like, hey, yes, everyone requires money to be able to provide themselves with their basic necessities and dignify our lives to that level, instead of kind of getting lost once again into who's right, who's wrong, which I completely agree with you. This is something that misses the whole point of what is required as a matter of practicality and urgency in this planet. Hence the proposal of the living income guaranteed, which is in essence a proposal founded on living principles, meaning giving to another as I would like to give to myself, and supporting each other and strengthening this interdependence, which is currently non-existent if we continue antagonizing and kind of having these endless debates of which ideology is best. So that's how, the common sense that we speak about here is practicality, which is, as Anna is mentioning, considering the planet, considering the resources, and that we require management. So I'd like to ask you here, when it comes to the practicality of government, we do require, as human beings, a form of management, so to speak, an administration structure. Why is this? And why do you consider that we have failed thus far to do that?
Okay, I'd like to just quickly reply to what we were discussing before, because one of the points in relation to this point with ideologies being this closed system that we take for granted, what I also see that tends to happen in these discussions is that we don't realize that our opinions, our perspectives, our beliefs are coming from, they're not original. It's not things that we came up with ourselves. It often seems like that, but we have to remember, right, that we're mind controlled, so that our opinions and our beliefs are embedded within a cultural and a historical context. And what that also means is that in order to actually create something completely new, we have to first of all be able to identify the fact that we come from a legacy, whether it is our own personal or whether it's something that we've gained from school or from doing research. So so that's just another perspective on that. Yes, so we do need organization, and what I found in terms of this problem with government being such a dangerous form of organization is essentially because it is as mind control, as the few controlling the masses. It is founded upon a relationship of power and disempowerment. So it is implying that individuals are disempowered. They're uneducated, unskilled in being able to make independent decisions. But to remove that structure and then to assume, because there are actually people who believe that if we just take government out of the equation, we would as individuals be able to just live, in these local communities and barter, kind of, going back to this romantic idea of the village life, perhaps. But what we forget is that these structures, these power and disempowerment structures, are actually embedded within our minds, within that which we have come to accept as human nature. And what several researchers who have actually investigated what happens when authority is taken out of the equation and people are left to lead themselves, is that such totalitarian and authoritarian structures, they very quickly start emerging again, in spite of people having really good intentions. So what that means is that we're going to have to change ourselves on a fundamental level, but also that the structure of organizing or even centralizing, it's not bad in itself. Again, we have to go back to looking at things practically and physically. There are many examples of things being organized through some kind of centralization where it isn't totalitarian and where it isn't the few having power over the many. So I would say that transforming that is making it a very practical point, a very like you were saying, an administrative point only, and then also ensuring that there is absolute transparency within that, absolute accountability, but most importantly, that everyone are educated on understanding the world to such a level that they will be able to see if there are mistakes made, or if there is suddenly someone who starts wanting to get power, and that structures are in place so that I as an individual would actually be able to intervene, and change such mistakes in a system. But you had one more question, right? Why we had failed.
Yes,
I think I kind of answered that in my...
Yeah, because that construct, as you're mentioning, exists within each one of us. I mean, the hierarchical organization, it comes even if you're not religious, it comes from the religious constructs of how we have always tend to look up to something, someone else as the creator of everything, and as such either to blame or to glorify. And we recreate this when we are born. Our relationship to our parents is the first foundation of that hierarchical structure in essence that we come to live in as this society, wherein you realize that there's someone to follow, someone will tell you what is right, what is wrong, and that's where we tend to get lost already into the I have the ability to learn how things operate and then make decisions by myself. We then learn only to take on, which is also what you kind of work on a lot, which is education. In the education system, the same process happens. Even from the knowledge point, there's this government, and you have to respect the law, and you have to follow and abide and be a good citizen and so forth, which is in essence meaning you're going to be a good slave. And that's what we've become, and we have to be very clear about this when we have simply accepted the construct as it is without even questioning it. So I definitely agree that a very important aspect in all of this, and that we've walked ourselves, or we've seen and continue to see, is how educating ourselves about the construction of the world system and how we have accepted that in our minds is like the very first point, and that ultimately it might lead to kind of like redefinition of the words themselves, so that instead of being controlled by the mind or being controlled by a cabal or a elite or this oligarchy and so forth that are the governments and have become also the corporations and one and equal, we can instead then look at how can I learn how to direct myself. Well, you cannot make decisions without being properly informed about something. That would be the first point, because I mean, if we talk about direct democracy as the power of the people to decide what's best for all, but if we don't know yet what is best for all, or how to consider each other and how to live that in practicality, then the discourse is simply void or blank. There's no context, no practicality to it, which in essence is also how I see that we obviously require principles in politics, but we also kind of have to deconstruct the notion of politics as these people of power, secrecy, corruption, and so forth that kind of fight against each other but are the same people in the end, and instead realize that we as people, as our education, as our realization, that we have to place ourselves in that position of being able to decide, for example, what is best for all, propose. That implies actually quite a lot of debunking of the old structures in order to create a new one. And that will only come when oneself as individual starts realizing the sham, really the scam that we have accepted currently as the notion of government, the notion of money, the notion of only a few individuals in power, because all of this is disempowering ourselves as individuals. So in terms of this, Anna, you mentioned that there's quite an importance in or a relevance in the practicality of this aspect. How can you explain us further about this?
Okay, so what I see is that, okay, if we take this, because this is also what I talked about in my video and this process that I've worked for myself, if we take the word government and, let's say that I come from this very, like for me, this word is really infected, like I almost can't stand it because I kind of encountered that in such discussions, people, like, it really triggers something within them. And what I see is that actually taking such a word, but obviously not just the word itself, but also the entire, what it implies and the structure and the practicality of how it is lived. But taking that and redefining it first for myself as an individual, and then together, and then seeing, okay, how would that translate into an actual practical change, is immensely empowering. Because what is otherwise done is that when we look at a word such as government and we become antagonistic against it, or we want to fight it, or we want to avoid it, or we want to ignore it, what we're actually doing there is that we're confirming our own disempowerment. We're confirming that this mind control system has power over us. And you know what is so interesting is that it's exactly the exact same situation that you were describing with our parents. That when we grow up and when we're born, I think that everyone can relate to this, that we have this belief that our parents automatically know what is best. They automatically know what is right in the world. And then, you know, we start realizing that they don't actually know, and that they're being hypocritical, you know, that they lie, but then they tell us not to lie. And then what we do is that we start and we try and fight them, or ignore them, but we actually end up feeling even more disempowered. And then, you know, what happens? We get grounded, or we get spanked, or they exert some form of power over us in other ways. But if we actually take that notion of government, if we bring it back to that discussion and say, okay, so government means mind control, you know, look at it completely, like, objectively in a way, and saying, okay, I see how that functions. I see how commercials are affecting me, for example. That's an example of how this mind control is manifested. I will now, from this moment on, I will begin steering my own mind. What that means is that every time I look at a commercial, I won't just simply blindly, or like a zombie, just sit and soak it in. I will investigate it. I will maybe even go and research who made this commercial, what were their thoughts, what kind of symbolism is used in this commercial. This is something that I've done for myself, and it has been immensely empowering. Just that point of going and doing research, start becoming informed, but also not just, you know, I'm a teacher, so something that I try and teach my students is to not just go on Wikipedia and then you think, okay, that's what this is, but to actually look further and dig deeper and follow the money. And in that process, it's actually a self-re-education process. A form of self-governing emerges. But what that does is that what I've realized within doing that is that you realize how intensely messed up the entire system is, and how, you know, I have a responsibility to share what I have learned with other people. For example, within seeing commercials, because I know what it was like 10 years ago, where I was just soaking it in. And for example, as a woman, in relation to body image, being able to discern and assess what I see critically has the effect that I can make independent decisions about how I see things, about what I buy. And that's, I mean, I don't want anyone to grow up or to exist in such a state of zombification, and just take it for granted. So it actually, it empowers me, but it also, within that, gives me the responsibility to begin sharing, to begin educating, and that's what I see is required for all of us to do, because we know one person can't research everything at once, but then maybe I can bring a bit of the puzzle to you, and you maybe share a different perspective, and slowly but surely we can begin becoming self-governed, but not in it like an isolated way, where we don't really care about everyone else, because we realize now the interconnectedness of all of us, and how necessary it is that we come together, so that we're self-governed, but that we can be that together.
Yes, and I also pretty much agree with the aspect of, if I investigate something, then it is my responsibility to, now that I understand or see behind the veils that we've accepted as mind control as it is our responsibility to then also propose solutions, and that's precisely what these hangouts are for. And I remind you, viewing this hangout, there's questions and comments open if you want to participate. We pretty much encourage you to do so. And another perspective, taking it from the political aspect, like once that you start seeing that, yes, this is kind of like a theatrical performance, so to speak, where these actors that pretend to oppose each other are fighting to get to the king's position or the president's position. I mean, when we accept that as a reality and as the limit of our ability to choose what is best, of course that we've gotten ourselves to this point. So once that we start debunking that fallacy in itself, we have to then take it back to ourselves. Okay, I cannot trust the government any longer. I cannot trust what I've been fed by the media. I cannot trust what I've been sold, because I realize that I've been emotionally manipulated to go and buy, to go and be more encouraged to entertain myself and to understand how the system operates and so forth. All of this is actually the real mind control that we have to start considering here, and not just looking at the very narrow perspective of politics or the government in itself. So through broadening, and this is something that you and I have probably walked as well, how through broadening this to really questioning every aspect in which we participate as individuals, then we can start making decisions based on what is supportive for myself as an individual, what kind of foods am I going to be taking in, and so buying, who am I going to be buying from, and how am I going to be understanding the world system, and at the same time not go into retaliation, into fear, or into antagonism, but rather become from that irresponsibility that one can realize as where we have abdicated our power, to take it back to that self-responsibility, which is essentially why we have come together, because we realize that no ideology, no past political system has created this kind of solutions that we want to see in this world. So because nothing in history has worked, we have to kind of start anew, and not from the premise of whether socialism or collectivism or capitalism, but rather seeing how the world exists right now and seeing how can I participate here in a way that I not only empower each other, what we're doing here, sharing what we're also realizing for ourselves, and so get to a common ground of seeing what is the most required thing at the moment, the solution that is most immediate, which is, as we know, money. We require money to live. And if we start giving money to each other, besides from, reviving the economy itself, we can start getting ourselves out of that survival mode and actually getting to that position of, I have now time to investigate, or getting interested into how this world operates. What have I created of myself in this world? Have I just become a copycat or a copy of the copy of the copy in the system? Which is, yes, because we've come from this generational habit and pattern of just being blindfully or blissfully also following the system. So we're at a very interesting point in our lifetime wherein we have the ability to challenge everything that has been, because it hasn't worked, and actually empower ourselves through creating solutions. So
Yeah,
Anna,
and also because we now have the physical opportunity. There are so many amazing things being developed or tried to be developed, in terms of sustainable energies and various forms of networking. There are so many cool options that we can, or the internet, that makes it possible for everyone to educate themselves on what's actually going on in the world.
exactly, and this is something that we can also have another hangout in terms of technology itself, but how many people fear the control that might come. What if we get implanted a microchip? What if all of this and losing our humanity? But what of our humanity right now is really so valuable, and that we would want to preserve, if we see that who we are as human beings and our human nature is actually preventing us, like the emotions themselves, becoming emotionally attached to something, or angry at the government, or debating against others because it's my belief. All of this creates further separation. So, I mean, technology in the end will function according to how we decide that it will function. So it's not so much about the technology itself or using a microchip or not. That is not really the point here, but the principles that we are going to be implementing in such technology, which is the directive principle of the technology itself. Will it be working just to function to benefit a minority, or are we all going to be using it for the provision of what's best for all, in essence, to, for example, manage resources, to ensure that everyone has money to live? That would be quite cool, because I do see that, the idea of voluntarism, which I would also like to get your perspective on, and which goes back to the point of anarchism. We as human beings still have to walk a process to change. So that's why we do say we still require this form of structure, of foundation, of management, administration as the government. For sure, we have to change the people that is currently as the government. That's our task, that's our responsibility. But what goes on as a transition will essentially depend on us. So, Anna, what's your perspective on this aspect of voluntarism and maybe voluntarism within the political context?
Well, okay, so firstly, I want to say in relation to the discussion on technology that what I see is the basic problem that people have is again the fear of the mind control. But if we operate or if we can discuss based on the premise of saying that it is actually possible for you to become sovereign, a sovereign authority of governing yourself, steering your own mind by understanding your perspective, but also yourself in relation to the world system, then there's nothing to fear, because whatever you will be able to understand, you will be able to direct whatever you wouldn't allow anything to be done to you that wouldn't be good for you. So what is so fascinating is about this anger that comes up and this fear that comes up in relation to technology is actually an indication, like it's like the person is saying, without being aware of it, that I am not in control of myself, and I fear that. So that's quite interesting. In relation to voluntarism, what is it called? Voluntarism.
Yeah.
I constantly get that word wrong. Okay, so something that I've discussed with people is this, it's this idea of a society where if everyone can do whatever they want without imposing or abusing others, then it should be fine. That sounds really good, but I don't see how it can work in practicality. And I'm going to explain why that is. Because, and also it's kind of assuming this weird individual, like the individual has a right over its own life, as though whatever it is that you want as an individual will be what is best for you. But the thing that we forget in that discussion is that virtually, all our opinions, all our desires, it is something that is being indoctrinated into us from this mind control system. So if I, for example, grew up with parents that drank Coca-Cola, and I'm not saying that Coca-Cola is wrong or bad, but let's just use it as an example. And all my life, I've seen Coca-Cola commercials, and they're promising me that I can be beautiful and skinny and get the good guy and have these adventures. So I drink Coca-Cola, subconsciously to get that life. And we then have this voluntary system or individualist system, and I say, well, it's my right to drink Coca-Cola all day long, and if it rots my teeth, it's my problem. But the thing is that I have not actually made that decision as a free, sovereign individual. And this is something that I see, can be very difficult to accept, because it's kind of like a bitter pill that we have to swallow in realizing that I haven't actually made that as an independent decision. What that means is that my individual decisions, they're not even real. What is so ironic is that they're being governed by a collectivist system that is already in place. And from my perspective, with the process that I walked, because I didn't just, walk into preschool with these perspectives, it's really been a long process, is that what would be best for me as an individual at a fundamental level is and can only be what would be best for everyone. Like it has to come back to that interconnectedness. So that, yeah, so I would say that that is what we have to understand, that this idea of things being voluntary is kind of an illusion, because we cannot even live voluntary. Our decisions are not our own, they're not original. And in order to actually create a true sovereign system where you can make independent decisions, we're going to have to assist each other to deconstruct the current system of mind control and place in a new system where you would be able to make such decisions.
I absolutely agree, and it's such an important aspect that not many people talk about when talking about voluntarism. They only kind of remain to the principle of non-aggression principle, and that's it, as if that was the holy grail of the solution to the world. But as we know, and as we've realized ourselves, who we have become as human beings is a complex system of pattern recognition and copying from our environment and integrating and not questioning. So how can we, as you're saying, trust that that is our will, or that is what we really want to do, if everything that we are right now is nothing else but copies from the past? And if we know that nothing from the past has operated in a functional way and supportive way to, support common sense, what is best for all, to become a living human being that has living principles, if nothing of this world is currently existing as that, then it means that my decisions or what I believe I like or what I would prefer has to be questioned as well. And that's what we pretty much encourage everyone to also do, because as we've explained throughout these Hangouts, is that the change in the world system really doesn't come as an order from the top down, but rather from the down up, as the creation of the structure as a reflection of that point of self-change, that point of individual realization of where have I missed myself, where have I abdicated my own responsibility, and so becoming individuals that, the ideal, how I see it, maybe you agree, is that we get to the point wherein, because we live in such living principles, we don't require this form of control or management. But at the moment, how I see humanity ourselves as maybe teenagers, or maybe even less than that, like children that still require kind of like a structure in order to get to adjust, to live, according to principles that would consider each other, then we still have to walk through that process. And that's where I see ourselves as humanity. But of course, we have to genuinely evolve, not only what we've become as human beings right now in this false evolution, but really evolving in the sense of stopping that very individualized and really mind control perspective to consider basic concepts, basic grounds that we can all, in essence, agree with, which is, for example, the provision of human basic needs that everyone requires. Money, how can we support everyone? How can we live people? How can we prevent people from going homeless or hungry or without education? That's like basic things. Or how can we nurture ourselves better, for example? So we have a question. Oh, so it's not a question, but a comment. It's from Andres Felipe Penjo. He's saying, "Hi ladies, no questions for now. My comment, the government is a group of people as we are. Maybe we blame them, but these people have the same needs or rights to us. Maybe they have more money, but we are not different. So maybe we can work together for the solution or change." What's your perspective, Anna?
Yeah, so this is that we have to understand, and it's sort of going beyond that them versus us discussion, and understanding that the concept of government in its current form, where there are people who have power over others and who are use of cognitive disinformation and social engineering to control others, that is something that we as humanity have created together. I might not have been a part of it when it originated, but I am a part of it now, you know. So that's also, it's a really important point to stop blaming the government as though they're somehow different from we are, because it is, and it is unfortunate and it is horrific, but it is actually a symbiosis. And it can only function as long as we accept it. And ironically, this acceptance of the current system can even be a form of an antagonism. Like that antagonism against the system, against the government, is actually a part of the entire system. And what I've seen and what we've been discussing is that the only way out is through, which means to take responsibility as that, step into that position, take on the word government, change it in my own life, and then becoming active and actually taking responsibility for it, you know, in the world system. So it's kind of like when you were saying that it's like we're still teenagers as humanity. So it's kind of like we have to start becoming parents for our parents. You know, that realization that they don't got it, you know, they're liars. Okay, so then I have to step up instead of kind of still wanting them to take responsibility and it's their fault that my life is so horrible, where nothing ever changes because we just keep blaming them and they have to make the change happen when we can actually do that.
Very, very well said. And I absolutely agree that this blaming game is really so last century. We have to really get back to the basic aspect that we've missed all along, which is really learning how to take self-responsibility, as you're saying very directly. You know, if I am judging that person for being in power, then I then have to become that person that can be in such position and ensure that principles are guarded, that principles are guaranteed to every human being. How's that, you know? And we have the ability, because we're human beings as them, as everyone else. So we are no different, really. Only the notion in our minds of us being disempowered is what we have to eradicate and actually embrace that power that each of us have just by the notion of being a human being and the ability to speak, to direct, which is something that we all have to actually work on at an individual level, I'd say. So Anna, we're reaching the end of the hangout. Would you like to add any other perspective? I mean, for me, it's been very cool to get to all these points. Maybe some last words on interdependence and what this means to you.
Yeah, what I was seeing is that the thing is that the problems that we're facing on this planet, which are also manifested in our individual lives in various ways, they are created through a collective process in many various ways. And therefore, the solution has to come through a collective process from many angles, from education, from the money system, from individuals starting to take responsibility. And it's like there's, you know, that is the only way we're going to be able to change it, is through that collective changing process. And I would say that, you know, for anyone, the place to start, you know, because we're not saying like, okay, you just need to go into politics and have people vote for you and then you can make change happen. That's definitely not what we're saying. We're saying that this change has to come, you know, from all angles, starting with our individual lives. I mean, that's where I've started in my own life, because we tend to, you know, be very hopeless when we look at like the entire system changing. How's that ever going to happen? But if we start in our own lives with that point of empowerment, becoming the authority, steering my own mind, beginning to make informed decisions, beginning to educate myself, then you actually start realizing that it is possible, and be able to network with other people with different perspectives and setting projects into motion, which is exactly what we're doing with Living Income Guaranteed. That is all inclusive. You know, we don't take a ideological stand towards the left or the right or up or down. It's all inclusive, and there are other voices out there that do something similar that we would like to collaborate with and that we could work with on this common ground. that is our planet.
Yes, that is the common sense that we pretty much can sum everything that we've spoken right now to learn how to work together, to focus on the commonalities, the common ground, and take it from there, from those principles that each of us can implement. And I would pretty much encourage everyone to not become specialists of only one section, like only science, only politics, only economics. We've all kind of worked through everything, all aspects, a little bit here and there, to understand the greater scheme, because that's really empowering, and that's what we're realizing, that, and how we've also come to this conclusion that the change resides within each one of us, educating, but at the same time also becoming the participants, the real game changer, so to speak, in this reality. So thanks a lot, Anna, for your time. I pretty much enjoyed our conversation, so maybe we can have you some other time discussing other topics on education, which is your specialty.
Sure.
And so to everyone that's watching, we'll see you next time, next Sunday at the same time. Remember, you can place comments, questions, even after this Hangout is over in the YouTube video. And make sure you've subscribed to this new channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Anna. Bye.
Bye.